Do the trashy pulp novels of the world have anything to offer? Are bestsellers all they're cracked up to be? Here at Terrible Book Club, we explore whether you really can judge a book by its cover, or its ridiculous synopsis. You ever passed a book and thought, ugh, who's reading this? We probably are.
And welcome to episode 221 of the Terrible Book Club. I am Paris, and this is Chris.
Hello.
This time, I read Points of Origin by John Orr, published in 2008 by Infinity Publishing. This book was requested by our patron Patrick, who said, "This book was written as a fictional story about a fictional investigator trying to catch a serial arsonist who was terrorizing California in the 1980s. The author was an actual fire investigator at the time, and this was based off of real events. Literally, real events, because it turns out the author, John Orr, the arson investigator, was convicted of being the real-life arsonist. This book was even used during his trial. In the book, he had knowledge about the crimes, which weren't available to him, and he wouldn't have known. At one point in the book, the author slipped up and switched from third person to first person when talking about one of the victims." Well, thanks,
Hilarious.
Patrick. Yeah, thanks,
Jesus
Patrick.
Christ.
Yeah, it's not a fun one today. Thanks, Patrick, though. We hope you enjoy this very special true crime episode of Terrible Book Club. Very special after
I know, we're getting in on those
school.
sweet true crime podcast numbers. That seems to be the hot stuff.
Yeah. Somehow this has become a thing this year. This is now the second one that has come to me, via Terriblos Tentacles. I don't know. I mean, in some ways I enjoy the research, but in other ways I don't enjoy talking about crimes that have really negatively affected people because I feel a little gross about it. But I think
that's not most people. I think most people are super into talking about true crime.
Yeah. Well, I think I have done my best here in being respectful to the people who are negatively impacted, and also in trying to use a lot of different source material to ensure I'm getting the best concise version of the story out there. Speaking of which, you will hear me reference a lot of facts, anecdotes, and allegations, which largely come from the wonderful Firebug podcast by Kerry Antoulis and his team from Truth Media, as well as the book Burned by Frank C. Gerardo Jr. and Lori Kovach Orr. Both of those are linked in the show notes. Thanks to our patrons for providing the funding to subscribe to, a paywalled podcast and get extra source material. So all hail the patrons. Yes.
We're just passing the podcast bucks around at this point. But that's a healthy podcast economy. If we're all subscribed to each other's podcasts, it actually doesn't matter how many dollars you have. It's about the velocity of podcast dollars.
Yes, and how they ricochet around. And if you just get 3 other people in your life to subscribe to the podcast, and then they get 3 other people to subscribe to the podcast. It's all a pyramid scheme. Anyway, I gotta say, I really Burned was a fine resource, but that podcast by Kerry Antoulis, Firebug, was just really enjoyable to listen to. It was so well produced. It had a great theme song. The sound effects and audio were great. I don't know. I just have a lot of great things to say about it. So thank you, Kerry and team. It was a really fantastic, well done podcast, which I actually feel like was worth the money paid for it, which I never feel. So thank you, patrons. Thank you, Kerry. Alrighty. If this is your first time listening to this show, we don't usually do true crime. What we normally do here at the Terrible Book Club is read books that we assume will be bad based on the cover, title, summary, or some combination of the 3. Sometimes, though, like today, we read books that our patrons, listeners, or friends recommend. So we're typically, doing the opposite of what most people are doing when they are in a bookstore or while they're browsing the internet and looking for something to read. Usually, this experiment results in a hilarious and disappointing read, but once in a while, we actually end up liking the book. In addition to our usual barnyard language, today's episode includes arson, fires and their fetishization, murder, sexual assault, and other sexual themes. So it's not a laugh a minute episode today. I think if you don't want to hear about this stuff, just choose one of our other 220 episodes.
There's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot.
A lot of them also have that stuff in it too. So it probably cutting it down to somewhere around 100 episodes that don't have some form of those.
Still, that's an incredible amount of content to choose from. So go forth. Go forth. Choose an episode that suits your needs. Anyway. This is the actual back of the book, as Chris can see. I have the physical book today. This is the actual back of the book summary to try to get you interested. John Orr, former fire captain and highly respected investigator for the Glendale, California Fire Department, has published numerous articles on fire, arson, and explosive topics. He arrested or apprehended 400 individuals, over 40 of them serial arsonists, and solved many arson crimes. Also called the most prolific serial arsonist of the 20th century, Orr was arrested and convicted for a series of arson fires set throughout California from 1984 to 1991. Orr maintains his innocence, continues efforts to appeal his convictions, and proclaims his novel, Points of Origin, is fiction. Join the investigation as lead character / arson investigator Phil Langtry searches for clues leading him to a prolific serial arsonist.
That's really funny that the self promo on the back is like, I also set a lot of fires, but no, I didn't.
Yeah, it's we're gonna explore that duality today. That's what we're gonna be focusing on.
And honestly, it's about the velocity of fire too. Like as long as you're trading fires between.
I mean,
if you're doing an arson, I'm investigating you for arson, and then you investigate me for the arsons that I committed. That's a healthy fire economy.
Yeah. Actually, the velocity of fire is important when it comes to fire investigation. So there you go. Alrighty. Well, we're going to talk about the book that he wrote, Points of Origin, which is what Patrick requested. I am then going to give you, speaking of duality, a mirrored description of that same period or a similar period of time in reality. So I guess first we're going to look into the mirror world in the book, and then we're going to look at reality. So this is going to be a bit of a long summary, but Chris, I have tried to keep it interesting by keeping the tone very sarcastic and also integrating some trivia questions for you. So
Great.
I did that because the tone in John Orr's book is also rather haughty and maybe sardonic is the right word. So so just trying to mirror the vibes, trying to recirculate those vibes I'm getting to keep the vibe economy.
It's about the velocity of vibes, really.
Yes, exactly. All right. So I'm going to give you my summary of Points of Origin, and then I'll let you know. It'll be obvious when we're switching gears from the mirror world to reality. But first, here we are in John's version of events in his book, which is, of course, totally fiction. All right. It's 1990 in the LA metro area, and Aaron Stiles needs fire to get hard and get off. Phil Langtry also gets emotionally hard for fires, but can get physically hard for human women, so he's definitely not weird. Both are firemen of different persuasions. Aaron a firefighter, Phil a fire investigator, but both have an unusual passion for fire. Aaron's passion flares out of control as he sets more and bigger fires in the metro area, increasingly in stores that are open and have people in them, which unfortunately leads to some of those people dying, including 2 teens, a grandmother, and her toddler grandchild. This doesn't stop Aaron, though. He just sees people as obstacles in the way of his fires. He just keeps setting them, sometimes 2 or 3 at a time, to really confound those lawmen. The only times we readers see Aaron is him hanging out in a 7-Eleven parking lot, thinking about fires, sexualizing teenagers, or assaulting them, looking for places to set fires, setting fires, jerking off to the fires at the scene, and then also jerking off to fires at home. We never see him at work or interacting with people in any real capacity.
So he's setting fires in his own house? And then
No. He's thinking about the fires.
Oh, I thought he was doing some at-home arson. It's just a little...
Just a little as a treat? Yeah. I don't know, maybe. We never see him at work or interacting with people in any real capacity, which makes him an incomplete, half-rendered caricature. Meanwhile, Phil and other fire investigators in the area are trying to figure out who's causing all these dang fires, and eventually start to embrace the theory that they're all connected to one serial arsonist, since many have the same starter device. Phil is the first to theorize that the arsonist is perhaps himself a fire professional, but no one else is on board with this idea at first. Poor Phil, he's an expert arson investigator and clearly the most knowledgeable man when it comes to fire, even teaching classes around the state and always showing up anyone who thinks he's wrong or who tries to antagonize him. Despite the fact that he's dripping with intelligence and fortitude, no one is willing to indulge in his theory. Unfortunately, Aaron is emboldened by a series of fires he sets one night and talks himself into attempting to rape and burn alive a local teenager, Trish, who was a witness to one of his earlier fires in the 7-Eleven. Luckily, the assault is left incomplete and she does not die, but Aaron does tie her up and she suffers from smoke inhalation and burns. Phil eventually collects more evidence and continues investigating, finally convincing his colleagues that they need to look into fire professionals when it is discovered that Trish was tied with a bowline knot, the fireman's friend. Because no one else, like campers or hikers or climbers or Boy Scouts, could ever know a bowline knot, one of the most common knots. At last, Phil and these disparate fire investigators are assembled into an official task force and go on a grueling 20-page long surveillance of Aaron in the book, culminating in a final showdown, 80s action movie style, between he and Phil. Phil, of course, triumphs when he shoots Aaron and leaves him to burn to a crisp in the last fire he ever set. Phil is treated for his injuries in the fire and wraps his arm around his girlfriend while the sun sets over LA.
The sun, the biggest fire.
Yes.
The most jerk-offable fire there is.
Oh my god. Herein ends the book, but the tale has only just begun.
Ooh.
All right, so now we step out of the mirror and into reality.
Okay. All right.
Those who lived near John Orr as a child and adolescent in the 50s and 60s remember there being a surprisingly high number of fires on the routes he'd walk to school. Weird! Must be why he was so interested in fire! He joined the Air Force right after high school and went to their internal firefighting school while enlisted. Upon returning to Southern California in 1971, Orr wanted nothing more than to become a policeman or fireman. He applied to several departments for either position, but was rejected from all, so he worked a security job at Sears where he allegedly had a habit of holding shoplifters at gunpoint in the parking lot.
What the fuck? Hold on a second.
Oh, Chris,
They're giving firearms to Sears, like, security guards?
No, he had a carry permit, and it was the 80s, or 70s and 80s, so he did whatever the fuck he wanted.
I can, like, fucking drop the TV, scumbag. Like, you won't ever see that at a Target nowadays, let me tell you.
No, there is way too much liability with that shit. Notably, Chris, out of all the departments he applied to, one of them was the LAPD. So notably, Chris, what was the Los Angeles Police Department's reason for rejecting him? 1980s LAPD.
Jerked off during the fire test exam. Like, he just saw a fire and, like, pants came off.
No. Is that your final answer?
Yes.
Okay. Unfortunately, you were incorrect. The reason the LAPD rejected him was that his psychological exam indicated he was likely a sociopath, and when you're too sociopathic to be an LAPD officer in the 80s, that's a sign. Yeah.
It's just like 3 questions, like, would you like to murder someone? It's like, yeah, actually, kind of, yeah.
Yeah, so, like, you may remember the LAPD in the 80s and early 90s pretty negatively if you've heard about anything that happened at that time. So it's absolutely fucking... Actually, I guess this was the 70s. Sorry, excuse me. This was early 70s when he was applying. But, like, regardless, I think that is wild.
The exam is just they hand you a handgun and they just wait to see if you pointed at anyone.
Yeah.
And he did, because someone was trying to walk out the door with, like, a coffee cup or something.
Yeah,
he was like, free scumbag.
So, at long last, after many denials, the Glendale Fire Department finally accepted him as a fireman in 1974. John eventually became a fire investigator and was even able to start his own fire investigation unit when there were a whole lot of fires all of a sudden. In fact, by 1985, so 9 years later, fires were up by how much in the region in which John worked, Chris? How much were the fires up?
100%. Just like there was no fires and then all of a sudden it's all on fire.
Okay, no. I mean, California, due to the general dryness of the summer season and how much brush there is, there's like a reasonable amount of fires, yeah.
Okay, then let's tone it down to like 75%. There was like still a shitload more fires, but because there were normal fires.
All right, well, incorrect. It was 58%, but that is still
That's
a batshit increase.
Yeah.
It's very unusual for it to be up that much. Well, lucky for them, they had Orr on the case. He excelled at investigation, always finding the point of origin and starter, sometimes just walking into a fire and walking directly to them. In fact, he had found more...
Follow my nose to the fire
In fact, he had found more starter devices himself in Glendale than the entire LA basin combined in a 10-year period. Wow!
Dude, this is an incredible racket that he's running because, like, not only do you get to jerk off to the fires you started, but you also get to take credit and do awesome at your job at the same time that is investigating the fires.
Chris, you've discovered it! Yes. John taught fire science widely in the area, and other investigators praised him for his skill. Despite this obvious prowess, he wasn't respected by cops, and they made fun of him. So he carried at least 2 guns at all times and had multiple fake badges so he could pose as different types of police officers. That'll show him.
Wait. 2 guns? Like,
yeah.
To like just go like akimbo or something?
Yeah, so Chris,
dual wielding?
Yes, I have a question. What was the pejorative nickname given to him by police?
Johnny 2 Guns?
Oh my God!
Johnny double trigger.
Yes, so it's
what?
So they would call him 2-Gun John or 3-Gun John, depending on the flavor.
One in his teeth.
All right. Another part of his job involved...
Bam! Like, trying to talk around it. The trigger discipline is horrendous.
Another part of his job involved neighborhood surveys for fire risk. He would tell sunbathing women and business owners alike that they needed to clean up their shrubbery and flammable waste or else. And what do you know? Shortly thereafter, a fire would start in the very material he had indicated was a problem. If only they had listened to John. On one neighborhood survey in particular, he allegedly ran into suspected gang members tagging an alleyway. And rather than calling it into dispatch, he engaged in a high-speed chase in his fire truck, which caused the suspects to crash at a red light, at which point he got out of his truck and held them at gunpoint until the Burbank police arrived, when he promptly vomited.
Okay, wait, hold on. Okay, are firefighters, do they have jurisdiction to do chases?
No. No, they do not.
Do they also have...
No.
Are they also able to, like, hold suspects at gunpoint?
No. So, John got in a lot of trouble for this, but was not fired. Phew.
Damn. I could do anything in the LAPD in the 70s, or I guess the Glendale Police Department in the 70s
or
and
in
80s.
in the LA Basin region, if you were, any kind of...
3 guns at the same time, driving fast in my fire truck, firing them off and yelling at people outside the fire truck window. Hey, you better keep that shit under wraps or else it's going to be on fire. From me, kablam.
Yeah, like the idea of a fire truck engaging in a high-speed chase is like fucking great. Like, they're so unwieldy.
This is a Wild
they
West
are not
nanny is what's happening here. He's just firing in the air the whole time. Sirens going off. And why not the water is also expelling it because they have water on board fire trucks. That's how that works, right?
Yeah, just like the worst vehicle for a chase. Anyway, he was a notorious anti-smoker. In fact, he hated cigarettes so much that he kept a pack on his desk with a skull and crossbones on them. They were like in a little case to be like,
they're too
evil.
small. The fire's too small. I can't do anything with it. It's just a little tiny fire.
Well, funny you say that. When a pack of cigarettes fell out of his car visor one day, when his first wife was in the car with him, she confronted him about it since he was so ardently against smoking. And he told her something to the effect of, "Don't worry, baby, I'm an expert and I'm setting little fires, but they're under control." And presumably his face warped into the 80s equivalent of a sunglasses emoji. One of his later wives alleges that he used to carry fire starters and other fire paraphernalia in his car at all times as well, which is a bit odd even for someone in this profession. But anyway, the mysterious unsolved arsons continue as the years pass. 1984 was a notable year for fire in the area since someone had set multiple fires on the night of the World Series, including at an Ole's hardware store in South Pasadena, where 4 people died as a result. Ada Deal, a grandmother, Matthew Troidel, her 4-year-old grandson, Jimmy Satina, a teenage employee, and Carolyn Krause, a young mother also employed at the store. John showed up to the scene and pushed for it to be classified as arson, but the sheriff overrode him and decided it was an electrical fire because they just wanted to process the bodies because it was a horrible tragedy, and he kind of didn't give a shit about why it started. Even though an electrical fire was just not possible given the structural details, John was particularly upset because he knew this was arson. based on his experience and intellect, of course. There were successive similar fires at other hardware stores nearby, but still, no one linked the Ollie's hardware fire to those. Darn! All right, Chris, I have a question for you. What popular snack food is also extremely flammable and therefore an ideal starter for a fast and furious fire like the ones at the hardware store and associated fires?
Wait, what? Hold on a second. A fire was started with like a bag of Cheetos or something?
Yeah, which snack food is highly flammable and ideal to start a fast and furious moving fire?
Okay, I mean, the obvious jump would probably be Flamin' Hot Cheetos or Takis or something, right? Like you want to start with
those,
like,
I don't know if those existed in like the 80s.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think of like the 80s, a snack food that is perhaps really oily or greasy or like
what's your OG?
Like pork rinds, perhaps? Or like Lay's. Lay's are the greasiest of the potato chips, actually.
Yes.
So I would really.
So potato chips. Are, again, this is, Jesus Christ, this is not me telling, please don't do this, but like in terms of fire investigation, and stuff I read about in the, for this episode, potato chips are like, if you want to end up with a brutal murderous fire, that's what you start with because of all the oil and it's crazy. I had no idea. So thus, this first suspected serial arsonist was nicknamed what?
The Lay's Bandit. The Chip Bandit.
Oh my God, you are very close. The real answer is the Frito Bandito. Which is worse. But that's what they call him.
Yeah, that's worse.
Yep. All right. So after, the investigators are hot in the case of the Frito Bandito, the potato chip fires stop. But then brush fires with the same cigarette-based starter take their place, and they theorize it's yet another serial arsonist, the coin tosser, named for the coin he adheres to the cigarette starter so it has enough weight to drop into the intended point of origin when thrown from a car. At some point in the 80s, there's yet another fire at a Mort's supply store, and one of John's colleagues found John already at the scene and videotaping the fire when they arrived. After later reviewing the video...
Pants down around his ankles.
After later reviewing the video, it was clear he started filming when the fire started, well before the fire trucks and team arrived. He was just so quick.
Damn, like, just getting more, and why wouldn't he get more and more brazen about it when everyone's like, it's weird that, no one's even saying that it's weird that John's around. He's like, I guess I could just start filming and jerking off immediately. Like, I don't see what the problem is.
Right. I mean, because at this point, it's been going on since he was literally a kid, and so, like, nobody's ever accused him of anything. Speaking of how fast he responded to fires, there was another occasion where he had the same idea as a colleague to stake out a mile-long section of railroad where a series of fires had recently broken out, which turned out to be really smart because then those fires stopped. That silly arsonist knew better than to tangle with them now. There was also a car fire where the car's owner encountered a man standing next to the brand new Lexus while it was engulfed in flame. He said he was a police officer and jumped a fence to supposedly rescue people in the building that was also on fire next door. Of course, no one was rescued next door, and no one who would have responded to the scene fit the description the witness gave. Years later, she picked John out of a photo lineup as this man, so authorities thought he set that fire. Crazy stuff. By 1987, Bakersfield Fire Captain Marvin G. Casey starts to believe that a fire investigator is the arsonist for the serial fires he's aware of, since so many of them happened nearby a fire investigation conference that recently took place. 2 years later, in 1989, the same thing transpires during another fire investigation conference, but this time, Casey gets lucky and finds a fingerprint on the piece of paper that was part of the starter device. Catching arsonists is notoriously difficult because the evidence often burns up or is destroyed during the firefighting, and when a time delay starter like these are used, the arsonist won't be nearby when the fire actually begins. Anyhow...
Unless he's filming and jerking off at the same time.
Right,
which...
yeah. Yeah, right. They come back, really what happens is like they'll come back to watch the fire with everyone else to like make it look like they're just a member of the crowd, but they will be able to get away and not be seen as associated with the fire, right? Anyway, Casey cross-referenced attendees of both of these conferences, giving him a 10-person shortlist, including John Orr. Weird! He had the fingerprint compared to those of these 10 people, but alas, 1980s fingerprint technology at a local fire department was not great, and it didn't match any of them. Shucks. Casey tried asking the ATF for help, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, which I was like, alcohol, tobacco, and fire, comma, arms? Is that like what? Because I was like,
Yeah.
I didn't know they had anything
You
to do
have
with
fire in the name, right?
Yeah, I guess because tobacco, like cigarettes, can cause. I don't know. I was wondering. I just felt like I was in that scene of The
The
Simpsons.
ATF was like, that's not us, bro. That's sorry.
No, I just felt like it was like that scene in The Simpsons where Lionel Hutz is like adding punctuation to his business card
Yes.
to change the meaning, and I was like,
Yeah.
is that what? Yeah. So I don't know. Casey tried asking the ATF for help, but they thought his theory that a fire professional was behind this stuff was absurd. So we're not going to invest time and manpower to physically pull fingerprint cards from each person's office to try to match it to the print on the paper because it was the 80s. So they told Casey to fuck off.
Yeah, that could take a week? We don't have that kind of time.
God forbid. By 1991, another string of arsons are happening in the LA metro, where the arsonist has been lighting stuffing and pillows on fire at hardware and fabric stores for the last year. What did they call this third suspected arsonist, Chris?
Pillow bandit.
Oh my god, you're so close.
Sleepy fire.
You're so close.
Pillow bandito.
Think alliteration. The pillow what?
I'm trying to think of a P word that is like igniting.
Related to fire.
or-
Related to fire. What's a P word related to fire? What's the Greek
Slipping-
word for fire?
I don't know what the Greek word for fire is.
Okay. It was the pillow pyro.
Oh, pyro. Oh,
Yeah.
God damn it. Jesus
Yeah, I
Christ.
was really hoping you were gonna get it because I was
Wow,
like, oh,
brain's not
pyromancy.
activated today.
Yeah, it's okay.
If you said
All right.
Dark Souls, I would have gotten it.
Oh
instead of
shit, you're
Greek
right.
word.
I fucked that up. I really should have said that.
I'm not
huh?
educated, Paris. I play video games instead. That's where I learned my Greek suffixes and prefixes.
Yeah, it's I mean, I guess it's really like Latin from the Greek, but whatever. Latin and Greek. I mean, at the time, a lot of Latin, borrowed from Greek. Anyway, the ancient classical word.
Yes.
Let's do that. All right.
Should have known that.
The pillow pyro. All right, so this finally generates enough concern to start a task force, which is debuted at a regional fire strike team meeting and catches the eye of a guy who was friends with Captain Casey. At last, the connection is made that perhaps all of these varied and disparate arsons are being perpetrated by the same person, who is in fact the Frito Bandito coin tosser pillow pyro.
Oh, damn. The triple threat.
They now have access to better fingerprint analysis and are able to match the fingerprint to none other than John Orr at last. But maybe John just touched the evidence, right? Nope, he was never in the chain of custody. Whoops.
Oh.
The task force then puts trackers on John's car, the first of which he finds and mistakes for a bomb, which creates a very Looney Tunes scenario. And they surveil him for months. When they follow him, they find him buying cigarettes, which is supremely odd since he is a vehement non-smoker, as you may recall. Unfortunately, he quickly figured out he was being followed and often drove erratically and at high speeds to just fuck with them. He was at last present at yet another suspicious fire and finally indicted and arrested on federal charges after the hard work of Casey, ATF agent Mike Matassa, and the rest of the task force on December 3rd, 1991. They had a search warrant and found compelling evidence, like a briefcase John was known to carry everywhere that contained Camel unfiltered cigarettes, matches, rubber bands, and yellow-lined paper, the precise elements of the recovered starter devices.
It might as well have been labeled arson kit.
Yeah,
right?
really, yeah.
Not even anything else in the briefcase to kind of throw you off, right? Like a book, some papers or something.
Nope. In the months after his arrest, Chris, what happened? What do you think happened?
There was just no fires anywhere.
Yeah,
They're
yes,
no fires.
yes, correct. Ding, ding, ding. Yes, fires in the region decreased by 90% in the months after
Jesus
his arrest.
Christ.
Wild, so wild. Look at that. What a weird
Fire,
thinking.
wild fire. That were not wild. In fact, it was
Nope.
very not on wildfire.
They were very chill, very chill.
Well, luckily, climate change has taken over for John Orr.
Yeah. Oh, from one hand to another. Whew.
Getting those stats back up there.
Oh, grim. So, the manuscript he had just finished and been shopping to publishers, Points of Origin, was entered into evidence and heavily focused on during the trial due to the similarities between the fires written about and the real ones that happened. The prosecution asserted that there were eerily similar details that he could not have known from the crimes, like, for example, a conversation between the grandmother and the 4-year-old right before the fire happened. He described it in the book exactly as the grandmother remembered it, right down to the flavor of ice cream the child was eating. And he was not an investigator at this fire, even though he showed up to it. He did not work on the case, so there's no way he could have known that. And other things, other details being eerily similar to his own life, suggesting that the book was more nonfiction than the fiction Orr claimed it to be. The prosecution took particular glee in describing John's BDSM habits and how he sexualized fire and violence, touting him as a sexually deviant freak, which is not a view this podcast subscribes to be clear, at a time when America was steeped in the Satanic Panic. This, combined with the book, fingerprint, and a mountain of circumstantial evidence, led to his federal conviction on 3 counts of arson and acquittal on 2, 8 months later. After the LA County prosecutor reviewed data for 1,100 fires, California, too, had a case. In 1994, the state indicted and charged him with 21 counts of arson and 4 counts of first-degree murder. 4 years later, he was convicted on all of this except for one of the arsons. All of his appeals as of the day of this recording have been denied, but he maintains his innocence, believing there was a conspiracy to frame him, and it was actually either another fire professional or a kid he arrested a few times for arson. You can read his nonfiction novel, Points of Truth, for more on his theories. Alas, he will probably be remembered best as the most prolific serial arsonist of the 20th century after setting approximately 2,000 fires over 30 years.
Damn, I mean, that's like it's every other day, right? Like,
it's an estimate,
right? Like, you got to be doing it like pretty prolifically. You got to be on like a YouTuber schedule of like content creation, shall we say?
Seriously. And like something to keep in mind is like I tried to tie this narrative together as best I could, and I chose some little things to sprinkle in, but there is so much circumstantial evidence. Like, in my little story here, I talked about how he showed up early, how he showed up early to a fire, and then he was like randomly at a scene. Like, these things happened multiple times. So these were just small examples of things that repeatedly happened, which built the circumstantial evidence. And he ultimately he has a total of 4 ex-wives, and they all had stories. I included one of them, but there were more. I also chose not to focus on the sex stuff because I kind of felt like it was not related to what, and I just felt like it was kind of a, like I said, sort of a 90s, like, people who think fire are sexy are evil. And it's like, okay, well, maybe, it's only evil if it gets to this point where you're setting fires that kill people to jerk off to. Like, obviously, yeah, sure, that's bad. But I don't know, even in interviews that Frank Gerardo Jr., the journalist who wrote the book Burned, even in interviews like within the last 10 years, he tends to hang on the sex stuff a lot, which I found unfortunate because I feel like it's not important in terms of proving that John did all this stuff and set all these fires. Again, the only thing that's important is that his desire for sexy fire was so great that he didn't care if he killed people or put people in danger. So those 4 people unfortunately died, or were murdered. Let's say it, were murdered by John, even if it was unintentional. It was negligent, right? He knew setting fires in places where people were, there was a chance that people wouldn't get out, right? Mm-hmm. Anyway, there were other people who were hurt by the fires. Like, there was the last serial fires that he set were in the College Hills, is referred to as the College Hills fire. And that, I think, started as a brush fire, but it grew due to, the dry brush, and there were houses there. So houses caught on fire, people's pets died. There were these teenage girls. You get a really great view into their perception of what happened on the Firebug podcast. These girls who were babysitting, they were young teenagers. I think they were like 12, 13. And they had to carry a dog and triplets out of the burning area, and their feet were burned. Like, they all have PTSD. I mean, a lot of people, like, so many people were affected by these fires, not to mention, like, fire is scary for most people. Like, sure, there's a subset of people who think fire is sexy and all, but, like, fire is actually pretty fucking terrifying when you are confronted with it. So the impact of this is, like, so much bigger, I think, than you may first come to believe. Yeah. So anyway, there's a lot of other evidence and stuff. I just sort of touched on some of the most important things and tried to keep it in a roughly chronological order to make the story easier to tell. But yeah, that's that. Chris, do you have any questions before we move on to the rubric for the book Points of Origin? Now that we're stepping back into the mirror.
We went pretty extensively. I'm just stunned, of course, that someone could go on for this long and everyone around him was like, oh, it's not even saying that's weird, but just not considering that to be an option. It just really goes to show you how being in a position of authority can really just automatically put you out of people's minds as a possibility.
Yeah, especially at this time, right? 70s, 80s, even before that, 50s, 60s, right? Like, I feel like that was a time when everything was very binary. The bad guys were bad, the good guys were good. And there was a lot of hype about, like, crime in America, war on crime, war on drugs. Like, it just wasn't in people's ability to think. Like, they just couldn't conceive of someone.
Like, if you got to this position of authority, then you must be super against the fires or whatever. And, like, technically, I guess, sure, but also super for fire.
And even as part of this isn't something I mentioned, but there were fire investigators who were like, every year we've got, like, one firefighter who gets arrested for setting a couple little fires. They're like, but never a fire investigator. Like, that's not possible, because in their minds, fire investigators were like, just above it, right? Like you said, you get to that point.
Scions of being against fire. Like, you're a fire investigator because you fucking hate fire. Yeah. You just want to stamp all of it out as much as possible.
Yeah. There's that. And then there's also, I don't know how familiar listeners are with California geography. I certainly am not that familiar, but these fires were all in the same region, but they were still pretty far apart. This is before the internet, before cell phones, before local news was like, I feel like, you could turn the TV on, maybe see something about another fire in another town, but you may not. And same, like, these departments weren't sharing information at first because they had no reason to believe there was an arsonist, like the same person hitting all of their districts, right? Like, it just wasn't something that had happened before, so they had no frame of reference for that, which is why they thought it was like, oh, the Frito Bandito, the coin tosser, the pillow pyro. Like, they were thinking about them all as different people in different areas.
They're creating, like, a legion of doom of arsonists, but never considering that it's just Lex Luthor or whatever.
Yeah, right. And and because there had never been an arsonist who committed this many fires. So it just was not even possible in their minds. And then you have there's just a lot of factors, by the time, like, the late 80s, by the time the late 70s, early 80s rolled around, John was, like, well regarded as a great fire investigator. Because again, when he strolled up to a scene and just walked right to the point of origin and starter and described how it happened, everyone was like, wow, this guy's great. Not like, wow, this guy's fucking obviously setting these fires. Because again, that was not something they could think of. And even the people who did, and again, there were many people who found his behavior suspicious, but they sort of just chalked it up to, like, I don't know, a weird incident because it was only, like, they only encountered it once, like him showing up early to a fire, or, like, being somewhere where he shouldn't be, like, in a jurisdiction that he didn't, like, there's no reason for him to be there. But, if all of these people had known that other people were also noticing John do these things with this behavior, or that it happened multiple times, I'm sure something would have come of it before. But again, this is not an era where people are surveilled constantly like they are now, frankly, right? Like, think about the hardware store. I mean, there were many hardware store fires, but when people say hardware store fire, they're talking about the Oldies one where those 4 people were murdered, right? Normally, you'd have cameras everywhere, right? But most of the time, most businesses didn't have cameras, or if they did, they were fake, or they only had a few, like, in strategic parts of the store, right? So John definitely took advantage of that and was enabled by, being able to be anonymous. He's like a, mid-height white guy, looks clean cut, quote unquote, right? Short hair, normal, quote unquote looking. I don't know. No one really suspected anything. If anything, a lot of his colleagues, a lot of people thought he was kind of annoying and, like, weirdly fastidious and know-it-all. And, like, he was based on the fact that he has four ex-wives, you might be able to guess that he was a serial philanderer as well as a serial arsonist. He was constantly chasing women, always cheating on whoever he was with. And again, this is, like, something I feel like the prosecution focused on, but I didn't really want to talk deeply about because I don't know, like, sure, he's a shitty guy in that way, but that doesn't really have any bearing on the fires, right? The only connection that someone, Carrie Anthulis on the Firebug podcast, had a couple of bonus episodes, and in one, he talks about talks about Orr's ex-wives and ex-girlfriends, partners, whatever, confirming that they would engage in sex acts that involved, tying up, hitting, and fire. Like, he would have a lot of candles, tie them up, and then, like, do sort of a mock assault, right? And in the book, in the scene where Aaron Stiles, the evil arsonist, attacks Trish, the teenager, the witness from the 7-Eleven fire, and, thinks he's going to sexually assault her, ultimately doesn't. He, sets fire to her apartment, ties her up, hits her on the back of the head, like, things that... So, a little tough there because I don't know that we should be, like, prosecuting people for their, sexual interests or whatever, but obviously, again, when they lead to other people dying and, like, terrible shit happening to people, that's not cool. But, there were just a lot of things in the book that were eerily similar to John, whether it was the Phil character or the Aaron Stiles character. And, through both Frank Gerardo Jr.'s work and Carrie Antholis' work covering this case, they both come to the conclusion that Aaron Stiles and Phil Langtry in Points of Origin are just two different halves of who John Orr really was, right? And I feel like I've come around to that as well. The interesting other thing about both of those journalists is that they both covered the story as young investigators in 1991, in the early 90s. So, and both of them, when they both came to the case, thought John was innocent. And only through interviewing him and sticking around and following the court case, did Frank at first come around to believing John was guilty. And then, Frank worked with Lori, one of John's daughters, to make the book Burned. Carrie had a little bit of a different path. He came back to the story 30 years later and re-interviewed John over the course of 2 years, which is how the podcast came to be. And also comes to the conclusion that he's obviously guilty. And so, I don't know, I just thought that was a really interesting, a lot of, like, parallels, duality, reality in the mirror world, getting a lot of fun stuff today, in a very grim tale overall. But I don't know. And again, I feel like I came to this, I feel like the same thing, like when I read the book, when I read all the supplementary material, listened to the podcast, I listened to other interviews too, a lot of research my poor little part-time body did for this.
Well, thank you for your service. We still need to get into the rubric, though. So how about we jump into that one?
Yeah. Sorry, I was just going to say,
the actual book that you read, the content of the actual book that was requested.
I just want to say I felt like I ended up following the same path because I also at first was like, most of this is circumstantial. Like how, because before you get deep into the information, a lot of the surface level stuff, like whatever you might find on, like, I don't know, Wikipedia or like in really shitty news articles, it doesn't build up all the compelling stuff and you don't get all that detail. So you don't realize that the circumstantial stuff was, the most compelling circumstantial evidence I have ever heard of. And that there were other things that were very important to the case that led to the conviction. So anyway, thank you for the tale. We will now move into talking about Points of Origin, John Orr's book. All right. Rubric time, Chris.
Rubric time.
Great. Let's talk about technical construction. This is going to be a short one. There's more than a few missing words, some homophone typos, and like a smattering of other little things, which like normally I don't think I would be that worried about in something like this that is like, I don't know, vanity published. Because I assume Infinity Publishing is like a vanity publisher. I guess I didn't look that up, but I feel like I have a good sense of these things after 10 years.
Yeah,
of
you could kind of tell just by the publisher name, right? Infinity Publishing is like, we'll publish it all forever and ever and ever and ever.
Yeah. So this was first written between, I don't know, 1990 and 1991. And the edition I had, this was published in 2008. So it's like, I don't know, man, if you can't find all your mistakes in 30 years, that's not great, It's just a little, it's not like rife with typos and errors, but I still feel like enough time has passed. And also he's been in prison for long enough that you got the time.
You can spare some editing time in there.
Yeah, so take another look at that, when you have a chance. The formatting... When
you're imprisoned. Make sure you edit when you're imprisoned.
Yeah. The formatting was fine. Actually, like, we flip between Aaron and Phil's perspectives by chapter until the last 30% of the book when they start to share chapter space as Phil closes in on Aaron, which I actually thought was good. I appreciated that formatting. I thought it was a nice little device. Great. Punctuation, I don't know, there was like occasional comma issues where commas were missing, or there was a comma, but the word that followed the comma was missing. A couple things. Again, this is just like a, please, for the love of God, use your time in prison to continue editing before you put out the next one. The cover and art direction, here's the thing. I think the cover photo is fine. It's a shadowy firefighter with some sort of edited flame. It actually looks pretty good. Like the eye in Origin is like an extended match. However, the rest of it doesn't work for me. There are 3 different fonts on the cover, which I just hate. I just don't like the mixing of fonts that don't go together. Like, okay, you've got this and this are the same font, but then you've got this sort of word art for Origin, and then this text blurb that's in like, I don't know, fucking italic papyrus or something. It just, it sort of cheapens it when, unfortunately, I think like if they had just done Points of Origin where everything was the same as the Origin with the match and like everything had the same text and that fucking italic, almost papyrus-like font blurb wasn't on the cover, I think it would actually look a lot more professional. But yeah, so a little bit of a graphic design fail on the cover, but it's fine. It's not a crime against vision, but it's like, it's borderline. All right. So I would give this a 0 for technical construction. This is actually fine. Right. It books. All right, plot construction. For general coherence, I mean, it's pretty basic, right? Since it's pulling from the author's life, and so it doesn't, when you know that, it doesn't feel terribly creative. Plus, there's also a little bit of nonsense where, like, of course, Aaron and Phil have to have a chance meeting in the road, and there's a final showdown, because this all just feels like a bad Steven Seagal script from the 80s, one of the movie's many direct-to-VHS films or something. Another notable point of, like, sort of, I don't know, bizarreness in the plot is Aaron gets incensed by all these fires he set and, decides he wants to, unfortunately, try to rape Trish, the teenage witness from the 7-Eleven fire. And I'm actually going to read an extended scene. Again, I'm not going to read the assault scene. No. But we're going to read the lead up to it. And you're going to hear something that will make you laugh because it is so absurd. So hopefully we can get some minor enjoyment out of this. Let me just flip to... This is another edition of Paris had to put a ton of little notes in a physical book, so it's going to take me a second to... my note wasn't sticking out enough. That's
what happens.
What happens
the long notes.
When you don't stick your sticky note that you ripped into 4 pieces to make little bookmarks. Okay. Ahem. Aaron saw a lone teenage girl standing on a balcony, debating whether she should follow the crowds. He pulled over quickly. She was wearing a tight t-shirt and looked about 15 or 16 and had long blonde hair. He shut off his engine and lights as he parked, almost crashing into a small wall where a sidewalk should have been. His mind raced as he saw the girl glance toward a sliding glass door with a small child leaning against it, looking out. It's babysitting, thought Aaron. No adults around. Without thinking, he slipped out of his car and walked to the apartment stairs leading to the balcony. He glanced down the street and saw that the onlookers had congregated at the corner. He checked the teenager out and was aroused by her vulnerability. His fire had excited him almost to the point of orgasm. He debated forcing his way into the apartment and was astonished at himself when he found that he had his pistol in his pocket. He decided to go through with it. He casually strolled up the stairs and she met his eyes as he approached. "What's burning?" she said to him. I think it's a store down on Commerce Street. Are you going down to watch?" Aaron ventured. "No, I gotta watch my sister." She smiled and looked over her shoulder. Aaron searched for the right words, hoping she wouldn't worry. "It looked like it might be small. They'll probably get it out quick," he said as he eased toward her, looking back, checking the street. "Oh, good. My mom's on her way home and has to drive by there. Is the street blocked off?" "Yeah, but she can probably come around like I did," Aaron said as he reached into his pocket. "See you later." He retreated back down the stairs to his car, pretending to search for something in his pocket. He quickly drove off, frustrated and flaming with desire. As he drove on, his hand cupped his crotch and slowly moved up and down. His mind wandered back to the fire, and he imagined the large-breasted girl at the 7-Eleven. That's Trish, by the way. In 15 minutes, he found himself across the street from the 7-Eleven, sitting low behind the wheel with his binoculars focused on the store. She wasn't around. His remaining beer was warm, but he dared not return to the store, its camera probing. The 7-Eleven was on a busy street and traffic flowed back and forth, slightly bothering Aaron. He did not want to have a cruising patrol car come by and check him out. As he glanced around to assess the situation, he saw a figure in an apartment building lobby less than a block away. Even without his binoculars, he could tell it was her. Roughly jamming the optics to his eyes, he saw her open her mailbox and retrieve several letters. She stood there briefly, then walked back into the dark hallway. He debated running to the building and following her to her apartment, but decided that it would be too risky. He didn't have any idea who might be inside. He saw a light come on, and again her silhouette appeared in a window on the 3rd floor. The binoculars, already focused to the distance, picked her up readily, and he saw her close the door. As he watched, he ran his hand over his chest, shuddering at his touch. His mind raced, debating how to get to her. Turning slightly, he rested his arms on the driver's side window, refocusing on the girl as she leaned against the door, reading her mail. He instantly saw that she had not locked the chain running from the jamb to the door. The room's light switch was right next to it. He smiled and held his breath when he saw her toss the remaining mail onto a countertop with a frustrated look on her face. She was alone. Aaron decided he must act now. Quickly, he started his car and drove to the next block, finding a parking space in a nearby retirement home parking lot. He turned off his car and lights, silently slipping out and walking away. He kept his right hand in his pocket, wrapped around the small gun. As he walked, he felt the cool steel of the automatic. His breath came in short gulps, his mouth open, as he approached the lobby of the apartment. He stayed on the sidewalk opposite the building and looked upward as he passed her window. That's a typo in the text. She was leaning on the windowsill, staring into the night. Before she could see him, he turned around, but not before he measured her location. She was in the second window from the rear of the building. As he walked up the front steps, he looked at the mailboxes and immediately saw the hand-drawn breasts on the label. Emboldened by the discovery, he walked up the stairs. He was relieved to run into no one, and relieved at finding few lights working on her floor. A radio was blaring behind one of the doors. Mariachi music filled the hall. Its racket comforted him as he reached up to knock. He knew he must act quickly and not think about what he was doing. A too soft knock would cause her to be wary, but one too loud might get attention from neighbors. He hit the door slightly with his open hand, causing an authoritative thud. So, the things that are weird in this are... This girl happens to live within eye line of the 7-Eleven parking lot?
Yeah?
And he...
That she works at?
No. She just is a frequent customer. Sorry, I didn't get too into this, but she frequently goes in and, I don't know, like, frames older men for beer. It's really stupid. It's a very weird thing. So sure, she might live nearby, but her living so close that he could make her out from the parking lot, and she happened to be checking her mail at the exact time he wanted to find her, and then like She leaves the front door unchained. There's just like all this real like weird stuff. I don't know. It just.
Yeah, it is slipping into criminal fantasy, shall we say.
Yes, sure does. So yeah, coherence is like fine, but then stuff like that happens and it's a little silly. Rules following. I don't know if the rule is chapters change perspective from Aaron getting hard for fires and Phil trying to solve the case, then yeah, it follows that. It's at least happening within the confines of general reality, especially since this was real mostly. So it's fine. Character quality. Oh boy. They're quite corrugated. The arsonist just wants to jerk it to fires, and the investigator just wants to fuck his ex-wife and a few other women. You don't get a compelling sense of the love either of them have, except for fires. And even that is very mechanical rather than passionate. So I'm just going to read a couple of short selections. Okay, yeah, we're going to read this part, and it's going to include one of the unforgettable, terrible lines in this. Aaron sat at his dining room table, putting together several devices. The morning sun was shining brightly, but the Santa Ana winds had died down. The temperature was expected to reach the 80s instead of over 100 degrees. A layer of smog covered the valley as he drove home from work, and he could only see about a mile in the thickening haze. Not a good day for brush fires. He put together 3 devices and allowed the glue to dry. He then put them in his shirt pocket as he walked to his bedroom. He lay on his bed and lit one of the devices, setting it in an ashtray on a nightstand. He glanced at the clock. It was 9:15. He lay on his side, fondling himself and thinking of the large-breasted girl in the 7-Eleven. The smoke from the cigarette drifted upward in a straight line for several inches, then was dissipated by the air currents in the room. He blew the smoke away from him and felt his heart racing as the smoldering tobacco worked its way in the glue. He stroked his erection faster as the inevitable flame approached. He slowed when he almost climaxed prematurely. His mind wandered to the large-breasted girl, and he half closed his eyes, seeing her running from the flames. At 9:24, the flame erupted, as did Aaron's climax. He continued to stroke himself long after the flame disappeared and the cigarette fell into the ashtray. He closed his eyes tightly, imagining the large-breasted girl beneath him as he came. In his mind, he had pinned her down, controlling her. His mind retaliated against her for passing him by without even talking to him. "I'll fucking show you, bitch," he muttered as he finished, his chest heaving. He lay still for several minutes, almost falling asleep. Opening his eyes, he looked out the window and planned his day.
Man, in the context of what this book is, that feels real gross, but also like timing, like gooning to fire, like a cigarette that's like slowly like trying to do the simultaneous orgasm. Real high level fuckery there.
Yep. Let me see if I have any other like character stuff from the other characters. I know I do somewhere. I don't know. This is like, here. Yeah, this works. This works, actually. I mean, I could read, honestly, like, this kind of encapsulates
Can I just say, like, in that
Yeah.
last passage, he really made it a point to say large-breasted girl as many times as possible, where it's like, hey, man, I need you to really understand. They were big. I need to be very clear with you.
It's pretty bad.
That's the only detail. I don't know anything else about 7-Eleven girl besides that she reads mail and they're big.
Well, and honestly, like, if you did want to get into sexualizing the scene more, wouldn't you go into greater detail, like, sensations and physical stuff? It's so step by step. It's very like he thought about the boobs and then he got hard and then he touched the part and then he thought about the girl more.
And then he lit his gooning candle. And that's his timed wax gooning candle.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move to Phil and some other and Anne, who is his like love interest later in the book. Let's read a little bit about them. Get a little characterization of these two. All right.
He thought about the large-breasted Anne and lit the candle.
No. Phil awoke early, still exhausted. The sun had not yet peeked over Mount Tom, but enough light filtered into his room to see the clock on his nightstand. It was 5:30 a.m. A slight wind gusted, and Phil watched the window screen puff inward like a sail as he felt the warm air ripple the sheet covering his body, then hit his face. Looking up the slope across the canyon, he saw a large cloud of dust lift off the bare fire break cutting down the mountainside. In a few seconds, the same gust of wind hit Phil's window screen, causing small particles of dust to rain down on his bed. Santa Ana's again, he thought. He thought of the previous day, of his visit to Trish at the burn center. The wind was getting steadier now, and Phil reached up and partially closed the bedroom window. He searched through a small pile on his nightstand, finding the scrap of paper with the Holiday Inn's phone number. A cheery operator answered. Room 432, please. Anne answered quickly. Good morning. You're up early. Good morning, Phil. How's Trish? Exceptionally well, considering what she went through, Phil replied. And how are you, Phil? She asked with concern in her voice. Phil updated Anne on the previous night's occurrences. She in turn told him that nothing new came up after he left Fresno. So you think the guy who tried to kill Trish is the same one that burned the fabric store up here Tuesday night? I suppose he could be the same guy, but why did he leave Fresno and come back to LA? It doesn't make any sense, and I just can't believe there are two different guys doing this. A pair would be more likely than two different guys operating with the same MO, like I was telling you the other night about serial murderers and serial arsonists sharing some characteristics. There have been a number of serial murderers that work together, but I've never heard of two arsonists pulling the same capers. Phil, if it's just one guy and he was up here on Tuesday and is now back in LA, he probably registered for the conference Tuesday evening. If he left Fresno Wednesday, isn't there some way we could determine who on the registration list is now missing up here? Anne ventured. There was a brief silence as Phil thought. I don't know. It just goes on. It's just like, kind of, I don't know. It's not really like, I feel like it's not really how people talk, right? We'll get more into that later. Yeah. Anyway, people don't really have a whole lot of depth. Even both the main characters, like again, they're more like caricatures and very clinically described. Even like their passion for fire. But anyway, we can finish this up because I'm going to read more stuff in the next section. I mean, I kind of want to give plot construction a -1 because he's like, it's fiction, but it's all like shit he probably did, based on the two different juries really convicting him multiple crimes.
Or just following the natural events of your life because you were the guy setting the fires.
Yeah, and
I
not
guess
really
that's one way to come up with the thriller plot line is just do it and see what happens, right?
Yeah, but also like even his additions weren't good. So and were kind of like stupid and unbelievable in a lot of ways. So I don't know. I'm gonna give this a -1. It's not. It's not good enough. Like, don't be a coward. Just say it's real. Like, I don't know. All right, let's move into prose quality and dialogue. All right, for prose quality, we've got some awkwardness. The sentence is sentence, but we're not getting artful composition. There's something oddly procedural about all of the writing, as though this person had written a lot of law enforcement style reports their entire lives, which, makes a lot of sense, right? So you may have noticed this in the chapter, both of the chapter beginnings that I read. It kind of starts with like a weather report and like boring ass location details. And I'm guessing the weather stuff is because obviously that influences the fire, but man, it fucking gets old. You don't have to do it in like 50% of the chapters. Like, watch, I'll just pick another fucking chapter. Okay, great. Chapter 21. Ass dropped Phil off at his truck, still parked outside the El Serape. 3 parking tickets fluttered beneath his windshield wipers. The lack of sleep crept up on him as he slowly drove home, his window rolled down. The temperature had dropped considerably, and the winds had died down, making it a perfectly clear LA summer evening. The clean air and progress of the case renewed Phil as he maneuvered through the narrow streets to his home. It's just like every fucking chapter is like, here's the weather, here's like boring location details. Find another one. I'm sure if I just open to any fucking
like location details that don't add anything metaphorically or symbolically or to like the vibe of things.
Right.
Like all you're concerned about is like how much moisture is in the air, which could affect my fire starting.
Yeah. I don't know, and it's just very boring. And I also find it weird that he feels like he has to reset the scene every time. It's like, bro, I know where you are. You told us you're in the LA Basin area. I get it. Like, I don't need to be updated on the like weather conditions. Chapter 11. Phil awoke refreshed Monday morning, the bright sun streaming in his windows. Although the day was hot outside, he left his windows open to enjoy the silence of early morning canyon. A ceiling fan kept him cool. It was only 6, and he didn't have to be at work for hours, so he just propped himself up in the bed and stared out the window. He saw his deer across the canyon, walking slowly up the grassy slopes after spending the night feeding on canyon residents' landscaping. During the day, they went high up onto the mountain to catch the afternoon breezes on the ridgeline and in the oak groves where they slept. An hour later, he got ready for work and drove to the 7-Eleven. The owner was there, along with the nighttime clerk who was on duty the night of their fire. It's just...
like, literally just a guy staring out his window for a paragraph there, and you're talking about the deer travel patterns? How does that help the story?
And I think he's trying to be like, oh, this guy is just so, he really appreciates like quiet time and serenity, but it's so bland that it just comes off as boring rather than introspective, right? Because we don't get that internal thought. We don't get descriptive language. We get very matter of fact, this happened then, blah, blah, blah. This, then this.
Connect the deer to like how he's feeling about the case or his life.
Yeah, right? Yeah, so the whole thing is that way. I mean, even when we are in the midst of fires, and fires are like, I don't know, terrifying, exciting, in some ways, like there's a lot going on, but instead we get these really like mechanical and clinical descriptions of fire. And I can give you two, one from Aaron's perspective and one from Phil. So these are supposed to be two different people. And yet their descriptions of their experience with fire are very similar. Let's do this one. This is from Aaron's perspective. All he wanted to do was set his fires and get out. He did not want any kind of contact with anyone while he set his fires. He just wanted to be left alone. Aaron drove back by the hotel and onto the north side of town. He had logged several places that offered possibilities and found himself at a Mexican restaurant. There was an outdoor patio area overlooking a shopping center across the street. He could see an outdoor storage area behind a Kmart that was piled high with plastic trash containers and garden supplies. The trash area was next to yet another large pile of wooden pallets. Aaron prepared several devices and put them in his shirt pocket. He slipped his gun into his Levi's pocket and pulled down his shirt to cover it. Locking his car, he walked up the block and crossed the street to the shopping center. Like, why do I need to know every fucking minute detail this guy, like every move this guy made? It's like, again, it's like you're reading a law enforcement report. Like, it is exactly that. Anyway, back to the text. Sorry, I was so annoyed. Mm-hmm. He walked behind a group of teenagers entering the store from the outside storage area and veered into the storage area itself. The area looked good, so he calmly pulled out a device and lit it with a lighter. As he started to place it, an employee came out of nowhere and asked if he could help. Aaron mumbled and walked away, frightened by the encounter. He walked around to the front of the store and cupped the device in his hand. As he walked by the trash area, several cars passed, again frustrating his attempts. Not wanting to be seen in the same areas twice, Aaron walked away toward a nearby fabric store. As he approached, he looked into the store from the front windows. There were about 10 female employees and customers inside. His device was still cupped in his hand, and he didn't want to waste it. It had about 8 minutes left before ignition. He was scared, but the fear excited him. The women in the store might notice a man in a fabric store. But he knew that they would never remember anything. He slipped in the front door and immediately turned left toward the nearest wall. He skirted the displays of rolled fabric and the women, intent on reaching the back of the store, where he found piles of pillow stuffing and pieces of foam in various sizes. He reversed his direction briefly to make sure no one was watching and returned to the pillow stuffing. He reached to his left pocket and shoved the device into an upright display with several shelves holding the material. Without breaking stride, he headed back along the wall opposite his entry and reached into his rear pocket, taking out his wallet. He fumbled with the contents as he walked by the checkout, no one even giving him a glance. Right, and then I'm just going to skip a couple paragraphs to when the fire actually starts. As he thought of the reason for his lack of success, he saw flames licking the back of the store wall. His stare fixed on the flames as they spread. He was still amazed at the rapidity of the fires he set. It took only 10 seconds for the flames to get big enough to reach the 12-foot ceilings. Billows of thick black smoke raced across the ceiling, forced by the intense flames silently advancing. None of the employees or customers noticed the fire until the smoke hit a side wall and banked down toward the floor. Aaron saw a woman look up. Her hands dropped to her side in surrender. The flames continued to build, feeding on the plastics and fabrics. The woman finally placed her hands on the side of her head, squeezing out an obvious scream. All the heads in the store simultaneously turned toward her, stopping in mid-turn to see the flames. The smoke had hit the nearest woman and began to drop, covering the flames as they advanced, fanning out in a V-shape pattern from their origins on the shelf. In seconds, all the women in the store had run out the doors. Aaron saw the smoke push out behind them, as if gasping for more air. The fire billowed out, through the smoke, for more oxygen. The doors were held partially open by the internal air pressure displaced by the heat from the flames. The smoke column coming out of the door pulsed like shallow puffs of breath, and after only 1 minute of life, the fire started to die down from lack of oxygen. The store was now totally darkened by the immense blanket of smoke. And it goes on like this, but it's I don't know. I
see what you mean.
It's not exciting.
Like we're lacking the passion and heat of the fire starting, right? Like he's just describing, and then it fanned out in a V shape, and it went up the wall over here, and it started to go around the corner in that way, which I guess dilutes that.
Yeah, and then I guess I can read Phil's perspective from the final fire. Phil turned to his escape route. He dropped to the floor, finding little relief from the ugly black death swirling around him. The heat was unbearable, more than 3 feet off the ground. Phil crawled across the small room to the door leading into the inferno beyond. Only a minute had passed since the blaze exploded, and Phil could now hear other paint thinner cans rupturing from the flames. Phil knew that in seconds the cans would begin exploding, not just rupturing, as the intensity of the fire began to build. The oily death was already entering his lungs, causing him to sway, but Phil knew his only way out was the way he came in. By staying low, he could make out an aisle just 4 feet outside the door. Above the sound of the fire, he heard the lieutenant shouting directions to him in hopes that the noise would lead him to safety. Phil laid his head on the cold cement floor, his gun dropping from his grasp. A blast of heat brought him back from the brink of surrender, and the ease with which he found himself giving up. Smoke was stealing his oxygen, causing erratic thoughts. He slipped his feet under his sagging body and looked again at the aisle in front of him. Peering above, he saw silent arms of flame reaching across the opening, spitting their deadly smoke. The lieutenant and several employees stood in awe of the brilliant orange flames at the rear of the warehouse. Smoke swirled above them and finally dropped to their heads. All were ready to leave when they heard the 2 gunshots above the sounds of the fire. 2 men ran away, and one stayed with the lieutenant as both shouted Phil's name. They turned to flee when Phil staggered through the clouds of smoke. His hair and clothes were smoldering. He crashed into a tool display, opening a large gash on his head. The men staggered forward, grabbing Phil's arms and dragging him out. The lieutenant dropped to the floor, pulling them down with the sound of small, muffled explosions. They turned to look. A fireball belched from the corner where the fire had started, sending its heat rolling across the ceiling and exploding above them. Embers rained down on their backs, etching small black scars on their clothes. The heat gave the men the incentive they needed to stumble on, Phil's weight almost too much for them. Finally, they were met by others. The voracious fire chased them from the store into the parking lot in the bright sun. Phil was barely able to discern his surroundings. His body tried to suck in the fresh air, but the scum and mucus in his throat and his lungs caused him to choke and cough. Only after he threw up was he able to finally enjoy the feeling that he was alive. His eyes were swollen shut. Still groggy, Phil felt smoke again attacking him as he heard voices. "Let's get them back out of here! The whole place is going up!" He felt hands all over his body as he was lifted up, again nauseating him. The blasting sun suddenly went out of view as the men laid him against a building in the cool shade. He heard Anne's voice, but didn't have the strength to respond.
That's a little better, right? Like there was like the silent arms of flame and like some better use of the action of the fire, like the tension of the paint cans about to explode. That was a little bit better, I would say.
Yeah, that's true. But I still don't find it compelling writing or as descriptive as I would hope.
Also, in the mechanical bucket, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like, we got some sloshes out of the bucket, right? Like it's trying to get out. The water, the writing water is trying to escape. But alas. All right, this author also suffers from the disease of not knowing which details to prioritize, which we've talked a little bit about already with like the constant weather updates and having to describe every single step someone takes in their movement when like it's not relevant. Like I don't need to know that he locked his car and walked across the street. Like I fucking know where he's going. Like I don't need to know that he made 3 starter devices and put them in his pocket and then he wore a flannel shirt and whatever. It's like all these little details that don't matter. There's a really good one that I sent to Chris where he's like, he and Anne are like in a hotel room and they're like holding each other. They haven't like gone all the way at any point in the book yet because of course, we want to portray ourselves as like a gentleman, even though, it wasn't reality. Anyway, he's like holding her and he's like, oh, I'm holding her. And I can hear like the loud fan in the bathroom. And it's like, why the fuck do I want to know? Like, that is not a great, like, why am I not hearing about how much you like her or how soft her hair is or how it reminds you of something you like?
Or even if you wanted to be like, and like the only thing I can concentrate on is the fucking bathroom fan because I actually don't care about this. Like, right? Like,
yeah, right. Yeah.
Connect it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, there's no depth of feeling. There's no depth of feeling to any of this. And I guess, if the author's a sociopath, that makes a lot of sense.
Hey, turns out.
Turns out. Again, I mean, that was just from a psychological exam from, the LAPD, but yeah, evidence points to that being perhaps correct, allegedly. All right, dialogue it's pretty alien. I mean, I read you a little bit, but there's other stuff. Oh God, the stuff where Phil is like interviewing people is pretty rough. Okay, this is Phil doing some investigation. So he goes back to, this is after Trish is assaulted and nearly burned alive. He goes back to her apartment building. They walked around to the alley at the rear of the building and to Trish's apartment, the wet smell of a recent fire filling the air. A group of teenagers crowded around the still open apartment door, chattering in Spanish, ignoring the bright yellow tape stretched across the entryway that proclaimed, "Crime scene, do not cross." 2 of the youths were just inside the doorway. Phil approached and, in Spanish, asked the 2 to step out of the room, checking their hands as they left. The group explained that they were residents and were trying to figure out how to secure her room from thieves. Phil smiled at the group and asked that they leave, saying he would arrange to have the door secured. Phil recognized one of the 2 who had been inside the room and grabbed him by the back of his shirt, pulling him back into the blackened apartment. The 15-year-old had terror in his eyes. "Tony, it's been such a long time," Phil said through his teeth. "I didn't realize you were such a caring person, looking out for your fellow residents. When did you move into this building?" "I don't really live here, man. We were just checking out the fire, and these other kids came by, so we..." Phil cut him off as Ash checked up and down the hall. "Tony, I am personally putting you in charge of security in this apartment. If anything gets stolen, I'll come looking for you. Understand?" Phil said as his grip on the young man's shirt tightened. "Si, Senor Langtree. I always did right with you before. I don't steal anymore. You took care of me good before." To Ash, Phil said, "I caught him trying to steal a helmet off of Engine 1 about a year ago while the guys were doing CPR in an office over on Brand Boulevard. Ash, go find the landlord and call Budget Board Up's 24-hour number and tell them you're the owner of the building and you want the windows and doors secured on this place tonight." Ash nodded, remembering Phil's propensity for cutting corners in order to accomplish a reasonable end. "I'm going to check the fire scene. Come on back here and avoid the guys downstairs if you can. Also, get a fire road lock out of your trunk and give it to the manager. Tell him to give it to the board-up guy to put on this door so we can get back in if we need to." So, like,
that is very Steven Seagal coded.
Yes,
like the way the side character talks, the needless extra detail of like the process on scene.
Mm-hmm. Yep. The whole thing's like that, which is why I was like, this feels like a bad Steven Seagal script. It just does. It just absolutely, that is the perfect descriptor. So anyway, I'd give this a 0 for prose quality and dialogue, just because like we talked about, I can feel like if this was like a late draft and more time had been put into it to like flesh it out, make it more of a novel and less of like a pamphlet, so like a feeling like a pamphlet, it could get somewhere. You know, there are sentences that work, and it's just not descriptive, and there's no heart to it, so it doesn't quite achieve anything above a 0, but it does structurally have language. So let's all right, Terriblo's presence. I mean, there's some wavering given the background of this book.
It's
right?
The context, really.
Yeah. So there's definitely some wavering, even though the events of the story are just in regular reality, and it's just like, I don't know, regular like human stuff, like people setting fires and whatever. The fact that this fiction book was basically nonfiction with the, exception of some characters and details, definitely some Terry blows, some tentacles.
Yep. Yeah, I would agree.
Our levels, how often did I have to stop and go back and read again to make sense of what just happened? I mean, actually never, because it was so procedural. It was easy to follow, like what was where in space and time. So that wasn't a problem. Please help. The amount of times we had to contact the other person in order to let them know what's going on in the book to maintain some sanity. A couple times. I reached out to you a couple times. Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. So let's give this a 0. Let's give this a 0.
Okay.
I don't know.
Right.
Actually, no, this is going to get a -1 because it's insane that somebody was like, I wrote out all my crimes, but they're not my crimes. So sorry.
I would agree. 0 or -1 are acceptable for this.
Yeah, let's go -1 on that. All right. Should this exist? Wait, do I do this first?
This is a very interesting category for this book.
Yeah, it is. Okay. Would readers of this genre enjoy this? No, this is pretty boring. I don't even think people that are into like basic action novel, like read Monster Hunters Inc. If you want like an actiony, like I'm serious. Like that is
I will say that was better than what I'm hearing.
Oh
here.
Yeah. There was, Larry Correa's on my mind today because, 2 things. some YouTube user left a comment that was like, I don't think these guys get that like fantasy books are fantasy. And I was like, wow, you don't understand that people have different tastes. And also a couple weeks later, I was reading, the latest update on George R. R. Martin not finishing The Winds of Winter. And there was a passage in the article about how Larry Correia wrote a foreword in one of his, a dedication in one of his latest books, unrelated to Monster Hunters International. And it was like, see, George, it's not that hard. It's like trolling George.
I mean, yeah, if you're cranking out Monster Hunter International, it's not that I have much sympathy for George, to be honest.
Yeah, to be fair. Everyone's wrong. Anyway, moving on. But seriously, like, at least Larry Correia can write action scenes, and he had creative ideas. It wasn't all bad. Like, read something like that. Don't fucking read this. Do we feel as if the author's goal was met? Weirdly, yes. I do think it was. Mm-hmm. Does it add anything new, interesting, or novel? Also, weirdly, yes.
Yeah, because of context.
Yeah, like using like someone writing out all their crimes and being like, oh, it's totally not real. I don't know that I've ever heard of that before. Maybe this is just my lack of experience with that stuff.
True crime exposure.
Yeah. Also, like, the fact that this book was used as evidence to convict him is a rarity. Like, I can only think of one recent example of that with the woman who killed her husband and, like, wrote about it in her book, and that was used at her trial. And I don't know enough to know how similar that was, or, like, how useful that was, or if it was major evidence or minor, whatever. I am going to go ahead and read a list of similarities between the book and real life. This is taken from Burned, the book that I've talked about that Frank Gerardo Jr. wrote with Larry. That Frank Gerardo Jr. wrote with Lori Kovac. Or just pop over to that. The prosecution, I think it was a state prosecution, listed 45 areas of direct similarity between the book points of origin and the real incidents of arson. I'm just going to read a couple. There's some provided in the book. So Aaron, again, I think I mentioned this earlier, but one of the most damning things was that he writes about a discussion the grandmother has with the kid who died in the Ollie's hardware store fire, and chooses the same flavor of ice cream that the kid had. And, like, it was mint chocolate chip, which is, like, a popular ice cream for kids. But the fact that he, like, if it had just been, like, the flavor of ice cream, you could probably chalk that up as a coincidence. But he wrote exactly what happened, and what that was like the grandmother, John had bumped into the grandmother and said, like, I don't know, excuse me or something. And the grandmother and the kid were talking about, I don't know, the ice cream or whatever. And then he wrote that into the book, and he wasn't, like, privy to that information in the case. So, and that's not really a detail that, like, another investigator would have mentioned, right? Like, oh, the grandmother said a random guy bumped into her when they were talking about ice cream. It's not like a gossipy thing. So that was pretty significant. Otherwise, Aaron in the book is like an insecure loner who gets little attention in his day-to-day life. His fires give him the attention he craves. When John Orr spoke to newspaper reporters in the weeks after the College Hills fire, John provided a similar description of the arsonist likely responsible for this destructive conflagration. Aaron's home in the book has a view of Mount Luke, and John's actual house has a view of Mount Luke. Let's see. Aaron prefers plaid shirts, and prosecutors presented photo after photo of John wearing plaid shirts, which I also think is kind of a stupid thing to bring up. Aaron sets a fire at a 7-Eleven that matches the circumstances of an arson in Burbank. John couldn't have known about that fire at all because no police report was ever created. Now that is good. In Points of Origin, Phil Langtry, the investigator, links fires in the Central Valley to a string of arsons that had been occurring in Los Angeles for years. Prosecutors asked, how was it possible for John to link all these real-life fires in his manuscript since none of them had been publicly linked at the time he wrote the book in 1990? So that's fun.
Literally mycrimes.txt.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, and of course, like, the list goes on. And again, some of them I don't find super convincing. But, you know, it's like the ones that are like more convincing paired with all the other evidence about him, right? It's sort of, I really feel like, because, like, you know, if you hear John tell it, he's like, they convicted me because of the book. And it's like, no, you fucking idiot. They didn't convict you because of the book. Like, it was...
Well, in some ways.
Well, it was... But... I view, based on what I have understood about the case, I view the book as another circumstantial piece of evidence beneath the giant mountain of more relevant
really
and
like
compelling
the
circumstantial
fingerprints,
evidence.
your location at the time.
Yeah, but right. And then the book was like, I would say, sort of like just a supplemental thing, but you know, the distortion from John's point of view is like, oh, it's just because I wrote a book, like, what is it, a crime to write fiction? It's like, no, it's not. It's a crime to kill people in fires.
Yes.
There's a lot of details that aren't readily available, and one of them that I found, like, another piece of circumstantial evidence that was like, oh boy, so the College Hills fire, the last, like, big fire, you know, I was telling that, like, killed pets and, like, really damaged those girls and, like, ruined houses and all that stuff. John claimed to know that a disposable lighter was the source of that fire, but never produced the device.
Oh.
Which is
I just know.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that happened with a lot of these fires. You know, he would also, like, again, like, be at fires that he wasn't called to before the team arrived in areas he didn't work, like, multiple occasions. So, you know, all that fun stuff. Anyway. Another interesting thing, and I don't know if this was just me not being observant, but I doubt it. There are other supposedly eerie details from the book that seem to be gone in the version I have. So I'm thinking that the original manuscript was different from the 2008 version, because Lori, his daughter Lori, talks about how there are paintings described in a house in the book that are identical to real ones from John's actual house. And on the Firebug podcast, they discussed that the investigator character in the book also gets hard from fires, but that wasn't in this version. So it kind of seems like he's deleting stuff that looks more incriminating, which makes me feel like the prosecution was definitely right.
Delete the whole thing.
Yeah.
Just delete the whole thing, actually.
And again, I don't know if I just missed that stuff, but there are a few other things that I noticed were mentioned, and I was like, but these aren't in this book. So I'm guessing that there was a change from the manuscript to this version. So, did it take something from us? No, it was boring, and it was easy to read fast because of that. What should someone read instead of this? Probably Burned, the book from his actual daughter's perspective, and the journalist Frank C. Girardo Jr., who followed the case both at the beginning and later on. Honestly, if you're just kind of interested in, like, the more, I don't know, like, the aftermath after he gets arrested and, like, evidence and stuff, you can focus on the last, like, 70% of, actually not even, it's like the last, like, 10% of the book. And then there's, like, a supplement. I believe there's, like, an appendix. Yeah, there's an appendix with photos, which is really great. I mean, you can't find this stuff anywhere else. Actually, let me see if there's a photo I'm looking for. If it's here, I will. Yeah. There's a photo of him holding a dog he rescued from a fire that he set.
Great. Really cool stuff there.
Yeah. So there's a lot of images and acknowledgments and, like, extra stuff at the end. Anyway, yeah. So should this exist? I mean, no. I think I feel like a solid
big
no.
-1 on this one. Like, don't
no.
do crimes and then write a story about it is pretty handily in the -1 should this exist.
Or like if you are going to do it, be creative enough to mask what you're doing, which is not what happened
TBC's
here.
advice. Just be better about that.
Be better about it.
All right. So final score here, Paris.
Okay.
You gave it a 0 on technical construction. Am I right about that?
Yep, that's right.
A -1 on plot.
-1. Mm-hmm.
A 0 on moment to moment.
Yep.
I believe we got a -1 on Terriblo's presence as well.
Yep.
And a -1 on should this exist. This is a -3 out of 5.
Okay, can we fix it? Again, what you just
don't
said.
Do the crime. Don't
write exact copies of your own crimes, nearly exact copies of your own crimes into your books if you're not trying to get arrested. I do wish that he had just mixed it up and like not literally tied together a bunch of the cases that they later attributed to him. People just take the write what you know stuff too far, and it produces things like this. This might be the worst case of that. He also mentioned in a more recent interview that his writing teacher told him to make his antagonist as evil as possible. So maybe he just needs a new teacher. Maybe he just got bad writing advice.
Sure. I don't think that teacher really knew what they were dealing with.
No. And, again, this is like, I can see that he can write a procedural report, and he tried to use that same style in fiction, and it doesn't really work, but you got to keep working at it. You got to move to the next stage. That's why I felt like this was like a mid-level draft, and it needs more development to humanize and give real character to the people presented beyond like fire makes him come and know-it-all investigator, and like women who are just like attractive and like a lamp in the corner. I don't know.
They're big. They have breasts and they're big.
And the only things that are given deeper description are like fire weather, fires, and firefighting, but like it's still clinical and mechanical even there. So just really gotta, develop empathy and an introspective writing and like
get over the sociopathy there. That really is the first step.
Yeah. So get a different writing teacher. Explore that.
Yeah.
All right, Chris, did you have any other questions for me or anything else you were interested in knowing before we close out?
I think you were super thorough here, Paris. So good on you once again for being the more researchy member here of the TBC duo. You're very thorough investigator.
Thank you. It turns out I actually just created this podcast so I could be called out as like good at investigating and reporting.
Oh.
It turns out
that's your racket.
That was my whole purpose.
Wait, Paris, did you write all of these terrible books? Is that what's going on here?
No. Prove it.
I can't. You have your terrible book gooning candle next to you that I have not observed.
Jesus Christ. All right. Well, I am really glad to be done. I'm glad to be done. However,
thank you for your exhaustive work.
I'm going to plug that Firebug podcast by Carrie Antulis from Truth Media one more time. We did pay for access to it, but I don't know. I think it's worth it if like you are interested in true crime shows. I think it's worth just pay for access for a month and then cancel it. Definitely not a thing that we also did. Which I have a reminder.
We encourage patrons to do that with us too.
It's true.
Like hop on
it's
from
true. Yeah. So I really appreciated that. That was I listened to it all the way through twice. And then I picked through the Burned book. I also read some other articles and listened to other interviews with Frank Gerardo too. But that podcast was the best source and the most well done out of all the sources I encountered. So check it out. Thanks, Carrie.
All right. And thank you to our patrons and Ko-fi donors. Thank you to our bad bookworms like Ben, Donnie, Emily, Jacob, Jared, Scott, and Will. Our exacting editors, Kieran, David, D, Emmy, Funny Robot with Antennas, Greg, Harry 7, Martin, Root Beer Cutie, The Ugly One, Elliot, and Xander. Our loathsome librarians like Veronica, Beast with the Least, Yanka, Luchek, Patricia, Julius of the Void, the Taco-Eating Unicorn of the Hot Springs. And our pesky publishers like Miles, Austin, Patrick, Fred, and George. As well as our Ko-fi donors like Mark, Tracy, our ever-faithful Kiwi Thing, and Excavating Lizard, along with Martin F. Brenna and Matthew, who relieved us of terrible books. If you want some terrible books we've read for the show, like this one, since it's a physical copy, you can buy them over on our Ko-fi page. All right, Paris, I am off to... It's actually me that wrote all the terrible books. I am the one that's behind all of them. So no. I need to write some more.
Our friendship was a lie. 20 years of lies. No.
That's what happens. Now I'm off to write more shit with Scribando, my alter ego of terrible books. Remember him? Bringing that joke back. It's me, the wizard of shitty books. I've been Scribando all along.
You were Scribando the whole time.
Scribando away.
I'm so ashamed.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Terrible Book Club. Terrible Book Club is an independent podcast produced by your hosts, Paris and Chris. Sound design and audio editing by Chris, with sound effects and music by Epidemic Sound and sometimes also Chris. Our theme song is Kiss by Yearn, which is, you guessed it, actually also Chris. You can find more of his soothing synthy sounds on Bandcamp at yearn.bandcamp.com. Do you want us to review a book of your choice on the show? Do you want access to some extra audiovisual weirdness? If so, become a patron at patreon.com/terriblebookclub. If you'd like to send us a one-time tip instead, you can do that at ko-fi.com/terriblebookclub. You can also support TBC for free by sharing the show on social media, following our accounts on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or Goodreads, telling your friends about your favorite episode, or by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, or anywhere else on the internet. To send us book recommendations or your adorable pet photos, send an email to terriblebookclub@gmail.com.